Order, order. Questions to the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Mr. Ian Murray.
Good morning. Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the deduction of trade union subscriptions from payroll through check-off is a matter delegated to departments in the civil service.
Ian Murray.
Mr. Speaker, the civil service has used check-off for the last 30 years. Indeed, large companies like BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce use it as a very efficient way to deduct trade union subscriptions from salary. Is it not the case that this is just another ideological attack? Because removing check-off from civil service payroll will cost many times more than running the current system for hundreds of years.
As I say, Mr. Speaker, this is a matter for departments to decide for themselves. A number of trade unions take the view that it's much better to have a direct relationship with members rather than having it intermediated through the employer, and that's a rather more modern way to run things, but as I say, it's a matter for departments to decide for themselves.
Priti Patel.
Speaker, does my right honourable friend think that it is fair on hard-working British taxpayers that their monies are being used to subsidise the administration of trade unions rather than that cash going on to frontline services?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has been a very doughty campaigner for the use of facility time to be much better regulated. And there was, what we inherited from the party opposite was a position where very large amounts of public money indeed were being spent on subsidising 250 full-time union officials just in the civil service alone, let alone in the wider public sector. But I'm happy to tell her that we have got that under control.
Mr. Michael Duggar.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister says it's a matter for individual departments, but his own department has written round to every department in Whitehall, his private secretary, asking them to review check-off. We know that the government, for political reasons, wants to scrap check-off, but Mr. Speaker, I've seen a copy of an official letter from the DWP, a letter which was subsequently withheld by ministers, that states, and I quote, "The department has concluded that the figure for the financial implications of ending check-off should be disclosed, and that the information held states, we estimate that the implementation costs could exceed £1 million. In light of this revelation, will he today agree to transparency and to publish the full financial implications for this misguided policy?
Well, I'm very happy to bring the honourable gentleman up to date, because what the DWP subsequently said was that that was a speculative and inaccurate figure. Well, I've seen the more recent correspondence than he has, if I may respectfully say so. And the truth is, ministers, as he will recall from his time in government, sometimes get given figures for the cost of making a change which turn out subsequently not to be true. This is such a case.
Nadine Dorries.
Number two, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the government has reduced the number of public bodies now by over 250. By 2015, there will be a third fewer public bodies than in 2010, ensuring increased accountability and efficiency, with continuing efficiency savings of £900 million a year.
Many Kwangos are unaccountable, unelected, have great power over people's everyday lives. They're incredibly expensive to run, with questionable outcomes. Will the Minister please consider another round of the bonfire of Kwangos to continue our ever-increasing march towards a leaner and more efficient government?
Well, I'm grateful for the encouragement of my honourable friend, and I can tell her that our quest for a leaner and more efficient government has already yielded in the last financial year savings of over £10 billion, which the party opposite did absolutely nothing whatsoever, which is part of the reason why we inherited the biggest budget deficit in the developed world. But we have more to go on, and what we've done for the first time, actually, is institute a round of triennial review. So every 3 years, we look at the status of every public body to decide whether it still needs to exist or whether it can be trimmed back, and we're finding there's much more scope for progress yet.
To the Minister for his
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State confirm that the abolition of the English Film Council and its amalgamation with the British Film Institute will still ensure that we make the very most of British talent given this wonderful creative industry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that that is the case. My colleagues in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport examined this question very carefully before reaching the decisions they did. I agree with him about the importance of the film industry in this country. It's a very bright star indeed, and we should certainly ensure that we do nothing that jeopardises that.
David Amos.
Sadly, one of Tony Blair's lasting legacies was to create a huge number of unelected, unaccountable, highly paid quangos, which has ruined this place and taken power from it. So will my right honourable friend reassure me what efforts he has taken to return power and accountability to the House of Commons?
Well, Mr. Speaker, a big part of the programme of public bodies reform has been to bring policy functions back into government in a way that is directly accountable through ministers to Parliament. And that's a big part of increasing the accountability. But the secondary purpose of the reform of public bodies has been to save money. And I'm glad to say that it looks like we're going to, if anything, exceed the expectations in terms of savings.
Speaker, the Minister has outlined the reduction in the number of quangos. Can he outline what progress is being made on the cost effectiveness of those that remain?
This is a continuing process. I mean, there is much more to do yet in terms of efficiency. So, as I say, we saved over £10 billion across central government last year, and we expect that to exceed £13 billion in the current financial year ending this month. There's much more to do on quango reform. As I say, we expect to have it be running at a savings rate of £900 million a year, but we've already saved in the region of £1.6 billion.
Mrs. Cheryl Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister consider in his ongoing work on public body and quango reform adjusting the responsibilities of the Major Project Authority, who, amongst their options, lists requiring publication of project information consistent with the Coalition's transparency agenda? Mr. Speaker, this is not happening because the government has suppressed the MPA report into HS2 in detail, hiding behind a summary, and isn't it about time we had an accurate description of public bodies, or that the government published this report?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my right honourable friend knows, we are publishing much more detail about the government's major projects than has ever been done before. And the role of the Major Projects Authority, which for the first time is bringing a consistent oversight and assurance across the government's major projects portfolio, has resulted in, whereas what we inherited was a position where only about a third of government major projects were delivered to time and on budget, now it's more like 70%. So we're making a great deal of progress. But I hear what my right honourable friend says.
Mr. Andrew Gwynn.
Public body reform in 2012, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee said that the Cabinet Office must get to grips with the programme's overall costs, benefits and key risks. But a recent National Audit Office report showed that actually those failings were still in place. When's the Minister going to get a grip?
Well, it's a bit surprising for the honourable gentleman to raise that point. The last government did absolutely nothing on this front at all. We inherited a position where the government didn't even know how many public bodies there were. We will have reduced that number by a third and cut the costs very significantly. By the election, we will have cut the cost of quangos by £2.6 billion. And so I would like at some stage him to reflect on the poor record of his own government, and we would be willing at that stage to accept his congratulations for what we've done.
Fine.
Yes, number 3, sir.
Question number 4, sir.
Mr. Speaker, ministerial appointments to public bodies are made on merit.
Mr. Nicholas Brown.
Well, the Minister will recall in the 1980s when the then Conservative government abolished the Metropolitan County authorities, the government was scrupulous to make arrangements for the successor joint boards to recognise the rights of minority groups on the local authorities as well as the majority groups. Such arrangements do not pertain to the new combined authorities that we're bringing in further down the order paper I see today. Why is that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll look at what the point the right honourable gentleman raises. The truth is that public appointments made at the moment in the last year for which the Commissioner for Public Appointments has published figures show that there is actually a slightly more appointees declared a Labour Party affiliation than a Conservative Party affiliation. But I have to say, for appointments generally, what we seek for is people with some commercial experience of running large organisations who can bring to bear the same desire for efficiency and to eradicate waste that we're showing in central government.
Mr Jenkin.
Would my right honourable friend join with me in welcoming the fact the rather artificial and silly row about Conservatives being appointed to public bodies has now come to an end, thankfully. May I also inform him and the House that the Public Administration Select Committee is going to have a look at the relationship between public bodies and their sponsoring departments to see how they perform in bad times as well as good, and how they deal with crises, and how the accountability should be improved.
Well, Mr Speaker, I of course welcome that inquiry. I think it's an important issue that should be kept under considerable review. Where the executive and Parliament foregoes the ability for a public activity to be accountable to Parliament, we do need to understand very clearly how that responsibility is being executed if it is not accountable directly in this place.
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker. I'm not sure if the row has come to an end, because in recent weeks we have learnt that a Tory donor has been made chair of Natural England. We've learnt that a former Tory member of this House has been made chair of the Care Quality Commission, and indeed in the Cabinet Office an impartial civil service post heading up the appointments unit has gone to a former member of Conservative Central Office. So can the Minister explain, who is of course a former Tory party chairman, why an exemption was agreed to give Miss Laura Wilde this post in the Cabinet Office?
Mr Speaker, you have to admire the gall of the honourable gentleman when the government of which he was a supporter relentlessly stuffed public bodies full of Labour donors, Labour lickspittles. It was the most appalling abuse of power. We are running things in a very substantially better way, as the statistic I just disclosed illustrates. And the further thing is, I can inform the honourable gentleman that the number of women being appointed to public appointments is now up to 45% in the last period, which is significantly better than anything his government ever even began to achieve.
Topical questions. Mr David Davis.
Topical number one, sir.
Mr Speaker, my responsibilities are for the Public Sector Efficiency and Reform Group, Civil Service Issues, Industrial Relations Strategy in the Public Sector, Government Transparency, Civil Contingencies, Civil Society and Cybersecurity.
Mr David Davis.
Mr Speaker, the Wilson Doctrine is a convention whereby government agencies do not intercept communications with members of Parliament without explicit approval from the Prime Minister. In a letter to my honourable friend, the member for Enfield North, in 2012, the Minister told that member that the Wilson Doctrine did not apply to metadata, thereby exposing whistleblowers to risks that parliamentary privilege should protect them from. Will he review this policy, discuss it with the Prime Minister and report back to this House?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I absolutely understand the point my right honourable friend makes, and I will undertake to look at this with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister.
Harry Sherman.
Mr Speaker, the Minister has a bit of a reputation as a pyromaniac, trying to having bonfires of regulation, of quangos and much else.
Look at your fingers, Butch.
If that's the case, why is he allowing the Financial Conduct Authority to introduce a new code that will inhibit crowdfunding, local people in their communities raising money through social media? Why do we have this new regulation?
I accept the compliment that the honourable gentleman pays me, gracefully I hope, and the issue he raises is not one I'm familiar with, but I'm sure my right honourable friends in the Treasury will want to look at it, and it's a great pleasure to have representation from the other side about excessive regulation.
Order. There are far too many excessively noisy private conversations taking place. Let's have a bit of order for Mr. Mel Stride.
my right honourable friend will know that the PCS union that stood up with such militancy against his pension reforms have themselves discovered that they have a £65 million black hole in their own pension scheme. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the union should spend more time looking after its members and less time politicising government reform?
Well, all organisations that run a pension scheme have to live in the real world, and I'm sure the leadership of PCS will take pleasure in the fact that their members in the civil service continue to enjoy a pension scheme which is significantly better than the one that PCS offers to its own staff.
There is huge concern about the government's proposals to sell or part privatise the land registry, putting 400 civil service jobs in Durham at risk. It works and even turns a profit for the Treasury. Why fix what isn't broken? Has the Cabinet Minister discussed this with his biz colleagues? And if not, why not?
No, I have indeed discussed this with my colleagues in biz. And I don't take the gloomy view that she takes, that any involvement of the private sector means that this will be less effective and have less opportunity to grow. I think a lot of what the land registry does is excellent, and there is a real opportunity for it to grow. And if that involves bringing in a private sector partner or private sector capital in one form or another, then I would hope she would support that.
Rob! Speaker, can I welcome the Minister's plans to improve accountability over senior civil service appointments? To ensure transparency in the scrutiny of appointments, can I also urge him to consider making the shortlist for appointments for the heads of Quangos, Whitehall departments and international courts the subject of prior scrutiny of select committees?
Well, the latter point my honourable friend raises is one that is constantly reviewed, and it will be no surprise to him that the urging he makes is one supported by many of the select committees. On the first point, for the first time now, all permanent secretary appointments are for a fixed tenure of 5 years. We publish the objectives of permanent secretaries, and all of this is much more, beginning to be more accountable than it's ever been before.
Qureshi! Mr. Speaker, this week concerns were expressed in the media about the move to a shared network for emergency services. Why is the government refusing to share the risk assessment, saying it will prejudice the procurement process?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not familiar with the particular issue that the honourable lady raises, but I will happily look at it and get back to her.
Mr. David T.C. Davis.
Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Minister, what would be the administrative consequences for government if patients languishing on long waiting lists in Wales were given access to the far higher services delivered by the coalition NHS in England?
Mr. Speaker, I was, as I think my honourable friend knows, I was in Wales last week, and the deficiencies of the health service under Labour guidance in Wales was a subject of constant discussion.
Mr. Graham-Jones.
Last weekend, while searching for a V14 form to return a tax disc, I did a search on Google and a copycat website came up offering services that cost money. What efforts are being made by the government to work with the advertising agency to try and deal with copycat websites that are ripping people off?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friends in DCMS and I had a meeting with Google and others last week to address exactly this issue, and we're taking urgent steps with Google and with the Advertising Standards Authority to address it. It is a real concern. He's right to raise it, and we're on the case.
Order.